And how many of you actually played the game? Oh, you're kidding. Anybody watched videos of people playing the game? Great, that's what I should do too. But playing the game makes a big difference. We're trying to induce some emotion here. And so this is a project I made in collaboration with Peter Brinson, who's a professor of, professor of practice of cinematic arts. And his previous work was Waco Resurrection. If you guys don't know it, please look it up. It's a really great piece. And you'll understand his evolution and why he dealt this subject matter to deal with this game. And this was a project that he started. And I saw him working on it in our lab. And as an Iranian American, I just felt this responsibility to make sure that he didn't, that it was balanced in some way. And so I just volunteered to work on it really to make sure that it reflected 1950s Iran. That's the period in which he was working. So this is Peter now. But this is another one of those really long-term projects, right? So this was us early on. That's Peter there during a meeting with students, and that's his child, Sylvie, in his arms. She's 6 years old now. That's us. The first version of the game, the alpha, actually won an award at Indicate. They created a category, documentary video game. It's not that these and you'll hear a video from him where he explains documentary video games are not necessarily a new thing. He just labeled it as such.
For those of you that are, for those students that aren't familiar with the project, can you give a little background on the sort of the theme and also the motivation behind creating it?
Yes, so it's about the 1953 CIA-sponsored coup d'etat against the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, who in 1951 nationalized the oil industry, which was in the hands of the Anglo-Persian oil company, today known as BP. It was their largest asset outside of the country as far as money making. The British were not going to let go of it quickly, easily. It was part of the oil of Iran helped the Allies win the World War II and was a big part of the reconstruction of the country. So it was, critical to the way that we live and they live.
Kurosh, can I say hi?
Yes.
It's Persis.
Oh, hey, hi, Persis.
Hi. If any of you want to know more about The Cat and the Coup, tonight is at the library. We also have a professor of history who's going to comment a little bit about the 60th anniversary of the coup. So if anybody's interested, it's at 7 o'clock in the library. So,
so that hour-and-a-half conversation is entirely on this project. I'm using this project to illustrate really this idea of collaboration. And I have a host of games here that are successful collaborations between artists and game designers. And there's a lot of other elements there. So it's kinds of things that I'm highlighting. So I asked Peter to talk about the game, and this video is actually a walkthrough of nearly all the game, played by an expert, Peter, and he's commenting primarily on the video game. It's 7 minutes long.
The Cat and the Coup tells the story of Mohammad Mossadegh, the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran who nationalized the country's oil industry in 1951. Soon after, he was overthrown by a CIA-sponsored coup d'etat. You play Mossadegh's cat. The player uses the arrow keys to move. The white cat outline indicates where you can jump to. The game world is broken up into a handful of rooms that function as puzzles, inviting the player to contemplate and solve a common cat dilemma: how to coax your owner into doing things for you, such as opening doors and picking up after you. The Cat and the Coup is a 2D physics puzzle platformer. The trick to solving the puzzles is understanding the value of momentum. We chose a cat because in short games, it is an ideal to take advantage of players' prior knowledge. The idea that a cat is a manipulative and self-serving pet is something players are quick to recognize. Something, in fact, that Mossadegh failed to identify about the United States. The player wonders who is the pet and who is the master. You might have gathered by reading the text embedded in the world that we're moving back in time. More about that later. Here Mossadegh is defending himself in court after the coup. The player has scattered his papers and otherwise hindered his efforts. Then the player knocks the judge's head onto the floor in combination with tilting the room. This tricks Mossadegh into making cracks in the floor. The red curtains symbolize that it was a show trial, and the peacock pattern on the balloon, among other things, indicates it was the Shah's court. If you remember, we are moving backwards in time, so we are now witnessing the characters involved in the violent coup d'etat. Mossadegh was attacked at his home, and after escaping, he surrendered by phone. The player is inciting the mob, a mob that was in part motivated by bribes. Before the coup, Mossadegh made his plea to the UN. He was an emotional and a captivating speaker, and he won the sympathies of people around the world. This is my favorite room, a depiction of when he met President Truman, who was in office before Eisenhower. Truman supported Mossadegh and was otherwise impressed by him. Here he literally lends his support, and the cat intervenes with drops of hot tea that resemble oil. We can now clearly recognize an arc, what I call the progression of aggression. Each puzzle's solution has involved increasingly direct and violent interactions. You, as the player, are reconciling your involvement as a key player in the larger story. And finally, we arrive at Mossadegh's great day, when the Majlis, the Iranian parliament, nationalized the nation's oil industry. With the help of momentum and higher ground, the player directly attacks the 70-year-old Mossadegh, forcing his hand to strike oil, filling the world with it. Here you are seeing some video dissolves as we pick up the pace in this video walkthrough. The game itself is experienced as one seamless camera take. Mossadegh floats on the sea of rising oil. We now move back through the world, but without interactivity. And since as we played moving downward, we moved back in time, now that we move up, we are told the story again, but forward. Also, notice that many of the metaphors have been peeled away, revealing source photographs of the history. Finally, whereas on the way down, the text came from sources written of the time, now we are given information gained since these events, with the benefit of hindsight. The Cat in the Coup presents the complicated story of a covert American intervention through allegorical game mechanics and metaphorical imagery. We hope it encourages personal interpretation and otherwise taps into the player's curiosity, because this story is not a mystery or a conspiracy. In fact, it is a quick internet search away. In the short history of video games, there are quite a few about war. War games are critically and financially successful, and that is a good thing, as video games are very difficult activities. They demand your absolute attention. In a sense, American gamers have been paying close attention to war, but the various CIA interventions during the second half of the 20th century represent important chapters in American warfare that are not depicted in video game history. The power you have in this game, and all games concern power, is subtle compared to most. Such indirect influence reflects how the CIA handled such coups. We have returned to the beginning, the day Mossadegh died. This is a story we all have learned in retrospect. As Kierkegaard, the 19th century philosopher, once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards."
So you can see that there's a collaboration between Peter and I. We worked with a bunch of students, and we actually made this game primarily in our free time and on vacations and stuff like that. But we did get two small seedling grants. One from the Advanced Scholarship for Humanities and Social Sciences, and then also from the game library, which was really important, critical in being able to hire the students. So usually I go into sort of the backdrop, or sort of the making of the Cat and the Coup. But I wanted to know what you guys, if you have a question now, or if there's a particular direction I should go.
What was the catalyst for the topic?
So Peter's previous work, the Waco Resurrection, looks at, revisits the 1993 ATF and FBI siege on the Branch Davidians. That's his interest in at the time in games, and I think this was really an evolution of that for him. And I saw him working on this project, like I said, in the lab, and I can't remember a lot of time. And I just felt this responsibility to make sure it was done right. But he's a very easy person to work with, and it soon grew from being about the CIA's interventions, all of them, to being really about the first one, this one. So originally one room was going to be about Iran, and then the Guatemala and the rest of them all that sort of line up underneath.
So Peter's work is generally like sort of, or I guess his latest body is more documentary, sort of game.
He was, he's made something very personal now, Rehearsals and Returns. You guys should check that out too.
The name of it again is what?
Rehearsals and Returns. And it's, forget the tagline for it, but it's something like conversations you never were able to have because basically people are deceased. It gives you an opportunity to talk to the deceased.
Can you talk a little bit about the aesthetic choices? Because I see how much Persian art there is, and it's beautiful. And at the same time, it's almost deceptive because what you're talking about is something that is not aesthetically beautiful. War and intervention.
Yeah, thank you. So when Peter was working on this, it was ink drawings. I want to sit down if that's okay and just slide through my hard here. I have a section for that. So when we started, like I said, it was we were working with the animation student. We had already done the animation for most of the walk cycles and the cat. So I felt like I had to hold on to that. And the rest of the work also looked, as you can see, very black and white. And the rest of the world looked like that also. And so I started, I tried to make it relevant by first looking at the ink drawings of Ardashir Mohasses. And many of you probably don't know him, but this is him in 1973. And he's one of the most famous, maybe perhaps the most famous contemporary political satirist from Iran, who left in the late 70s, and whose work is in the Library of Congress, and he's done work for the New York Times. And coincidentally, he was a friend of my mother's who worked, and she's in the back, by the way. My mom worked at the Children's Institute and then the Iran American Society, and had this great opportunity to meet artists and help sort of organize these shows. And so we have a large collection of his work and a lot of personal notes from him to my mom over the years. This is a collection of postcards, New Year's cards every year. Let's go. Sorry. And so I was trying my best to make it look like this. You see black and white in drawing, to stay true to the original thing. And in particular, I was very fascinated with these characters, how they're sort of emoting through their hats. But it never felt quite right. And then I flipped the cards over, and almost all of them were on Persian miniatures. I thought he was talking to me. And in particular, I started to see the rooms that Peter needed for these physics puzzles games. So I started to investigate that option. Presented to Peter, he got very excited about it. We looked at a lot of different sort of aesthetics for the game as a whole. And this one seemed to match, seemed to be appropriate, but it definitely presented a lot of challenges. Let's see what else is on here. But still highly influenced by Mossadegh directly. So one of the things you'll notice again and again in his drawings are these floating hats. Let's see if we can find another one. There's another one. And actually that's another postcard with him with a floating hat. And as I was reading through these catalogs, he basically describes that floating hat represents authority to him. So that's in the game. If you saw the floating hat over the bulldog, which is Churchill, I was trying to point to that exactly. This might actually be a good time. So the game was released in 2011, but I had a really unique opportunity to go to do an artist residency, take 3 months off to create the printed version of the game. So it came from miniatures and it's back to miniatures. So I brought a stack of them for you guys so you can look at them as we talk about it. Pass that around. Pass it around.
I had a question about, I seem to see the styles of Terry Gilliam in there as well.
Yeah, we've been compared to that. So in the video game itself, let's see in that direction. I'm going to show you an early version of the world. This is one of my pet peeves. And it relates, going right back to collaboration. And it is, let's see. That my deal with in working in collaborations is to always provide you with temp art, stand-in art, until you show me you can make it work. And so here's an early version of the world. Which I think looks even more like, what is the show that you took?
Monty Python.
Yeah, so we've been called the Monty Python of the rhythms and something with these.
I thought that was a really clever way to reference the British influence.
Yeah.
Actually, and
Yeah.
I was wondering like if that was intentional.
Not at all,
So-
but we'll take credit for that.